Hey Tristan, welcome to the show. How are you?
All right. Thanks for having me, Emir. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so as we were talking about, this whole series is about launching a podcast for B2B companies. And you have a unique position in the market because you run Motion Agency, which is an end-to-end production agency for podcasts, and also you do clips and post-production material. How did you get into this, first of all?
Yeah, good question. I think like most people, you kind of fall into something. It was it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't something that I set out to do when I got out of undergrad. But um, I've always my first entrepreneurial effort was as a video production company. So I had a previous agency before Motion. It all focused around creating television commercials, web video ads, things like that for a variety of organizations. And I built that company up and to about 25, 30 people. And then I exited that agency and started Motion. And Motion started as a video agency, predominantly focused on creating content for B2B tech companies. So we did a lot of animated videos. We did a lot of about us videos, promo pieces for companies. And then what we started to see was customers kept asking for like a recurring content plan. So a single one-off video was okay, but they wanted to be able to build something that stayed in touch with their customers, that helped their customers on a consistent basis. And so we started to develop shows for companies, mostly in the audio format. But then we started to figure out, like, why are we just doing audio? Why can't we add this layer of video that really capitalizes on the expertise of our internal team, add design elements, and then build this out into a show that really creates everything from audio content to the video content and then to written content from there. So we just really stepped into that process. And now that's really all that we do is create podcasts for tech companies.
Yeah, from what I've seen from like a couple people that is doing podcasts as a full-time job, is somehow all those people are like in love with podcasting, in love with the like art, in love with the podcast as a marketing channel, in love with all of that. Why do you think that's the case, or is it just me?
Yeah. So why do people fall in love with podcasting, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think you don't really know the impact of podcasting. I actually had a post about this on LinkedIn maybe a couple of weeks ago, but you don't really know the full impact of podcasting until you actually go through the process. Because there are a lot of things that you don't think about up front as a host or as a producer. You don't really understand the benefits until they're actually right in front of you. So, for example, as a host, one of the things that happens in your space is when you consistently have interviews or you consistently produce podcast episodes, it's really a vehicle to allow you to think and interact with other people, right, in your ecosystem. And so there are a lot of benefits to that. You build relationships naturally by having conversations with people. You get a chance to summarize information that you learned, whether that's writing or developing video content that stems from your conversation. And then you also just really get to capitalize on what's going on in your industry, and you get to learn more and stay ahead of the curve. So I feel like there's just a lot of benefits when you're involved with podcasting that are actually realized after you do 20, 30 episodes. And so I think people they're surprised by how much of an impact podcasting has on them because, they didn't really set out with all these expectations, and it kind of hits them one day that like, hey, I've done 40, 50 interviews and oh my gosh, I know all these people and I'm able to lean on them for different perspectives. And I'm able to ask for help in a lot of situations, or I'm able to refer people in the industry. So there's just a lot of downstream effects that you don't really understand until you're actually heavily involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you have produced Nick Bennett's Rep Your Brand in a new show, and you're a proud sponsor of that. You also produce Content Logistics. Are there any other shows that you're producing?
Yeah, we have a total of 6 shows, I believe. So we have The Anonymous Marketer, which is hosted by Nick Bennett. We have Content Logistics, hosted by Camille Trent. We have The Notorious Thought Leader, hosted by Aaron Balsa.
Mm-hmm.
We have Taking the Lead, which is hosted by Christina Brady. We also have Slice and Dice, which is a show that's in a collaboration with The Juice, which is a company that curates marketing and sales content. I'm not sure if you're familiar with The Juice or not. So those are some recent shows that we created. And then we also have a couple in the works right now that'll be released this quarter. So it's really a big part of our strategy at Motion, not only to produce our customer shows, but also produce our own so that we can test and try new things, new formats, new styles. It's really a playground for us to practice. And like I said, just trying new things, and that will allow us to then apply it to our customer shows and help them out as well.
Mm-hmm. And how do you, like, if I have an idea for a podcast and I come to you, what's the process after that to work on the idea and then launch the show?
A lot of people come to us at the very early stages of a podcast. So it can be in a stage where they just want a content engine, or it could be in a stage where we've thought about podcasting. We believe it's going to be a fit for us, but we're looking for some guidance on how to actually get the wheels turning. So most of the shows that we produce come to Motion with an initial idea or initial thought that podcasting is a good fit, but they're looking for someone to really help lay the foundation and develop the strategy and then build it out from there. So when folks come to us and they have some of these preliminary thoughts about a podcast, we walk them through a process that involves the creation of a strategic action plan. And that's a document that we really focus on up front to lay that foundation and establish that blueprint that then becomes the building block for all of the episodes and all the content from there. And within that strategic action plan, one of the first things that we do is create a theme statement. And that theme statement is a mission statement, what have you. That is what really sets the stage for everything that we do, whether that's an episode, whether that's the visual framework, cover art, video content. And that's a statement that basically identifies the specific audience that you want to connect with, and then how you're going to help them. And if you build those two things into that theme statement, everything else stems from there.
Okay. And
so I'm curious, Emir, one question for you.
Yeah.
So like, how did you start yours? Did it start with, kind of the strategy in place, or did you just start recording? Kind of what was your process there?
Yeah. So I just went into it, and right now I'm rethinking the whole strategy, because the thought behind it was, as you mentioned, I was not really aware of the effect of podcasting might have on our business. So it was just to meet with interesting people that you cannot otherwise. So I just sent out a couple cold emails, like 5 to 10, to people that I don't know. And we have never met. They have never seen me on LinkedIn. They have never seen me on anywhere else. And I got out of the 10, probably 6, 7 accepted it. And then once I did those first 10 interviews, I was like, wow, I now know there's 10 people that I would never know otherwise. And they're also either turning into a customer or another sort of partnership. So for example, I reached out to Tom, and then we did a podcast, and then I was on his podcast, and then we recorded another episode for this series, and then now we are becoming a sponsor of his podcast. So otherwise, if I have cold emailed him and then asked, can we be a sponsor of the show, we might not have gotten him all that stuff. And then later on, I was like, we need to turn this into something else. And then we create a media department inside Architect with its own brand, its own landing page. This podcast, 2 newsletters, LinkedIn posts, all the non-optimized content just for thought leadership. And then we added this podcast onto that as well. It's called The Flow now. And then now I'm rethinking all the strategy behind that to like how we grow it, how we can grow it. So before to distribute the content, like from a 40-minute recording, I can get easily 8-9 clubs out of it. And now like we hired a designer to help with creatives on the ads and then sometimes videos. But now I'm also thinking of if we should be like working with an agency like yours so that we can get more out of these clubs, get like more quality stuff. I'm investing in my equipment. And I'm like thinking of the strategy right now. Yeah.
Well, it's a good way to start, Emir. Like a lot of times, and customers come to us after that stage as well. So, I just had, I believe it was last week or an upcoming episode of our own podcast where a lot of companies start a podcast without actually launching one. So they'll actually do these internal interviews first, or they'll do some early conversations.
Yeah,
go through the practice. Yeah, and then you don't have like this pressure to launch a podcast. You kind of work through some of those kinks beforehand, kind of get a sense of how you'll structure an interview, or maybe how you want to change the angle of the show, and then that's how you can build it from there. So it's still a good strategy to go through some of those skills, or go through some of those activities, build those skills before you actually launch the show.
Yeah, and interviewing internal team members isn't like a really good strategy because normally you would interview people. Like I think there's a balance between them. Maybe you can do like 70% interviews, 30% internal. Because when you do internal, I learned it from Mark, by the way, during the other episode. So he was talking about how they differentiated, and the whole like probably 90% of the episodes is between Mark and Jason. Jason is the VP of marketing, and Mark is head of brand. And he said that this like puts them as the expert in the area, rather than if you interview someone, the other person is usually the expert in the topic that you're talking about. I think there's a value for that as well because the expertise comes to your side as well. But I think that's a pretty solid idea. Either to start a podcast, because then you don't need to cold email people. You just have it first 10 episodes with your own team members, and then it also puts you as expert in the topics that you're talking about.
That's right. Yeah, a big mistake that I think folks make is they set out to just follow one format and kind of one style and do it 100 times. But I think it's a lot more fun and it's a lot more advantageous if you have different formats and you mix it up like you're talking about. Maybe one week you bring on an internal subject matter expert and you have a conversation between two people at Hockey Stack, for example. Or next week you bring on a guest that allows you to build a relationship with somebody external to the organization.
Yeah, and also an important thing is probably most of the podcast hosts are doing this. You like record maybe twice per week, but then you launch the episodes every 2 weeks. So even though you meet with those people, you get the value. You don't need to launch it every single week because there's like editing, there's like social media posts, there's like clips, all that stuff. You don't need to do that stuff, but you still can record every single week, maybe like every day if you want to meet with new people, get their opinions, and then save it on your website and then launch it 2 weeks later. Or
that's right.
Whenever you want. Yeah. So if I have a podcast and then I don't have this strategy, but I like launched 30 episodes and I come to you and I say, oh, I need to work on the strategy right now. How would you go with that? What's the process there?
Yeah, I think the first step is to go through that discovery process. I think one of the first things I would do is ask you why you wanted to start a podcast. Like, what was the spark that said, hey, we want to try this content initiative? I always like to understand where that comes from. It comes from a variety of different reasons. Sometimes companies want to develop or want to increase their thought leadership and they want to get some of that, those ideas out into the market, right? And they're looking for a vehicle to do that. That's one reason. A lot of times, and we often see this where companies are building content in silos. They might have a writer that's writing a blog post. They might have a video editor that's creating a video over here, but there's no connection. There's no underlying theme for any of it. And a podcast is a great way to tie everything together. Back to that theme statement that we talked about, Emir, if you create that theme statement, and if the purpose is to help a specific set of customers or a specific audience, then that allows you to pull a lot of things in and create kind of this underlying structure that is really all designed and built around your ideal customer. And so it sounds like you're leaning towards creating maybe this separate website, this separate entity, right? That has content designed to help your audience. And we're doing a lot of that work even more and more so now, because it's a way for the organization to like disconnect the show from their company, so where it's not like so in your organization's name in the podcast, the objective is to help the audience versus help the company get more leads. And I think that's one way to do it, is where you just, really disconnect it from the brand, or just show that it's supported by or sponsored by the brand. But the idea is to help the customer in the long run. So that's what I would do, is just focus on the intention, like what was the spark that set out the creation of a podcast to begin with, and then understand a little bit about what has worked so far. What do you like about the interviews? How did you go about structuring those? Understand what you like and dislike, and then go down that process to really develop a strategic action plan from there with a rock solid theme statement that you can build everything else from.
Okay. Yeah. And and can you give an example of that theme statement?
Yeah. So the theme statement has a couple parts, but it really starts with the audience, and we encourage people to get as specific as possible. Sometimes people start with the idea of, we want to help marketers. Well, it's like marketers of B2B tech companies, marketers of cybersecurity companies. What are we actually talking about? And marketers is pretty broad. Are we talking about the head of content at B2B tech companies? Are we talking about the head of content or the marketing director within small, scrappy marketing teams at B2B tech companies? Basically, how specific can we get so that we can then design the second piece of the theme statement, which is, how do we help them? And so I believe when you're creating a branded podcast, which is different than if you're creating a podcast for a hobby, or if it's around, I don't know, fantasy football or sports or something like that, it's different if the objective is to have a business impact. And that second piece of the theme statement is really what solidifies that business impact, which is, how are you going to help the audience? So what is the problem they're running into? And then how are you going to explore that problem and that conflict within the podcast? And if you can combine those two things together, that's really where you get a good foundation for your show. And then that allows you to tie every single episode with a very clear objective back to that theme statement.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid process there, by the way. Yeah, and my last question is, over the years, what are some things that you learned about podcasting and launching a podcast for different brands and different people?
Great question. It's a hard one to learn, or a hard one to answer, because I have learned so many things. I think that the one thing, and I actually talked about this on LinkedIn today, is that the main thing behind podcasting is it's not a one and done project, right? So back to that scenario where I was talking about video projects, which I did a lot of times early on in my career. We would produce these very huge television commercials, and we would work for weeks on a 30-second spot. The script was 30 seconds, and we would work for weeks to identify the production aspects and plan the production, find the talent, and then we got to set the crew up. We got to do all of this. Then we got to go into post-production and get everything in place. And then once you're done, it's like you take a deep breath, and it's like, all right, that was a 30-second video. And, it's great, right? It worked. It airs on television. But there's nothing that then links it to the next thing that you do. It might be a single campaign, but there's no underlying theme that allows your organization to build on something. So with a podcast, it's a unique medium because you set this theme statement up front, and then you go on a journey. with your audience. So there might be some things that you are an expert in and you can help them, but there are other things that you might be not as familiar with. And then that's when you can bring on other external individuals to provide their perspective. So with podcasting, the biggest thing I've learned is that you consistently add layers and you learn each and every time with each and every episode. And I really don't think there's any other medium quite like it that allows you to explore topics of interest while also getting better as a marketer each and every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really relate with that actually. Especially the last sentence, because you also get better over time, either at like podcasting, either at asking questions, and also getting the inspiration that you want. And also, when you listen to a podcast, you'll need get the answers to the questions that the host wants to ask. But if you're on the podcast, if you are the host, then you ask the questions that you want to get answered from the expert of the area.
That's right.
Yeah,
what's been the biggest thing you've learned so far? You mentioned 10 interviews, right? But what stands out?
The biggest thing that I learned about like getting guests on the podcast is because many people, if they want to launch a podcast, they think like, oh, I cannot get this person, I cannot get that person because I don't know them. If you have a couple people in your network, that's how I did it. Have them on your podcast, and then when you send the cold emails, you can say, well, I had this person on the podcast and I'm inviting this person, but I want to get to you first, kind of like FOMO. And that really works well. That's something that I did for the first 10 episodes, and also on other areas as well. If you're selling, you need to create FOMO. If you're raising another round, you need to have FOMO. So that's something that I learned during that process. And also, sometimes like the way that I asked questions before was somewhat different. Now I'm like asking more open-ended questions with a twist. Like I don't say what you learned in marketing, I say what you learned by creating podcasts for 6 different people.
Right.
So that gives you a space to talk about your learnings, but also it has a like boundary.
Yeah.
Because before that I was like asking yes or no questions. Sometimes is this better than the other one? And it's really easy to say, yeah, this is better. And then when you say why, ask why, then they don't really have the answer. The way to ask questions and the way I approach new guests has changed fundamentally.
Yeah. I love that. And that identifying questions and different techniques, that's something that I'm always working on too. Mm-hmm. It's phenomenal to see like how many different types of styles there are out there. If you start to study different hosts and different podcasts, there are a lot of different ways that people ask questions. Some are a little bit more aggressive than others. Some have very clear questions and some are more broad. And it's very interesting to see what works. And I don't think there's ever a right or wrong. It's kind of trying to figure out what your own style is going to be. And that's really the fun part.
Yeah. And when I first started the podcast, now I remember it, I had a Notion doc with a couple podcasts that I liked. For example, My First Million, Noah Kagan, and Pep Law. So I wrote everything that I liked about them. So for My First Million, I said it's really conversational. It's like random ideas sometimes, and they cut each other off. Like if they want to add something, they cut each other. They don't really wait for another 10 minutes so the other person talks. I like that, and also the like flow of ideas. You get inspired. I like that. For Noah Kagan, it's like conversational again. It's like the topics that I never thought about, like some random guy is making billions in Hawaii, and he gets him on the podcast and then talks about that. And it's also, there's like business plus life. He talks about like getting retired. He talks about some random drug he took one day in Peru, stuff like that. And then I added some stuff that I want to do on my podcast that people might like. So I said like in B2B marketing, podcasts are really formal, other than Nathan Lutka's show. Others are not really conversational. I want to make it more conversational, give the guests the space to talk about their experiences, not just like rapid fire questions, stuff like that. That document helped me a lot too.
Yeah, that's awesome. You can learn a lot by studying other podcasters. I mean, sometimes one thing that I'll do is I'll pull a transcript and just study the audio file, video file, and the transcript, and just see like the different types of questions that the host asked, and to your point, to see when they perhaps interrupted the guest to maybe correct the conversation and get it back on track, or to ask a more detailed question. If you study those certain things, it'll help you do the same when you go through an interview. And if you maybe pick out one little thing and say, hey, I'm gonna try this in this interview. Yeah. I'm gonna try this approach or this technique. It's a way to kind of build things from there. So
yeah, it's like it's really similar to a sales role. You you do the research, check out their profiles, see what they're up to, great questions, and then every single interview is like a demo. Then you change the questions, some stuff you change, you add some other questions, you test other stuff, such and then see how the audience reacts to it and how the guest reacts to it.
That's right. Yeah, I like that comparison. I think, because in sales, you're really starting to establish that relationship, right? That's really what it's about. Try to uncover what they're looking for, what problems they have, and try to solve them. And I think, in a lot of ways, you share that same approach with a podcast for sure.
Yes, exactly. Tristan, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed talking with you, and looking forward to exploring your services so that we can work together.
Sounds good. Thanks, Emir. This is fun. Appreciate it.
Thank you.